Hi, my name's Emily Braithwaite. I'm a faculty research assistant in the Oregon State University Turfgrass program, and I'm going to cover some topics on yellow patch today.
Okay, so I know what you're thinking. This is the microdocium patch field day videos, but for this presentation, I want you to ignore these infection centers, and we're really just going to focus in on yellow patch today. So what is it? Yellow patch is a common cool season disease that we get in the Pacific Northwest, and it occurs during the fall, winter, and spring months. It's characterized as irregular patches or rings, and they can get quite large in diameter and are either yellow or white in color. Since yellow patch is occurring at that time of the year, the recovery tends to be slow for yellow patch that isn't managed, and that's generally because the grass is growing much slower at that time of the year. If we take a look at our Pacific Northwest disease calendar, we have our major diseases that we see at different times of the year. You can see I've highlighted those shoulder seasons of spring and fall, and that's really the time when yellow patch is most active. Generally, when we see it appearing in the winter, it's patches or rings that haven't been controlled during those shoulder seasons, April, May, September, October. You might be thinking at this point, what about Waitea patch? Now, Waitea patch is another Rhizoctonia disease that affects cool season grass, and the symptoms are quite similar to yellow patch, those irregular rings or patches that appear yellow and white in color. In fact, the two diseases are often misidentified and confused with one another, but the two are not interchangeable, and it's good to know the difference. So how do we tell them apart? Let's look at some key characteristics. Now, yellow patch, it develops during extended periods of cool, cloudy, wet weather, aka 9 months of the year here in Oregon, that fall, winter, spring period. But Waitea patch first appears in the spring, and it's going to persist into the summer. The yellow patch pathogen is most active at about that 50 to 65 degree Fahrenheit range. We also call this disease cool season brown patch, and that's because it's occurring at the cooler times of the year. A Waitea patch, think of that as more of a warmer weather disease, because the pathogen is most active at 77 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit, so quite a bit higher than our yellow patch. We see yellow patch infect annual bluegrass and creeping bentgrass in Oregon, and we've seen it on greens, tees, and fairway height of cut. But Waitea patch in Oregon so far is only infecting annual bluegrass, and it seems to really be isolated just to the greens height. Finally, yellow patch is what we might call an aesthetic disease. It doesn't really interfere with playability, and the symptoms will typically disappear when the weather starts to warm up and the grass can grow out of it. Since our Waitea is appearing in the spring and it's active under warm weather, those symptoms persist into the summer if they're not managed or controlled. And as that disease progresses, it becomes these sunken rings as the thatch collapses, and that can really affect the quality of the putting surface. If after all that you say, Emily, I'm still not sure, then what can we do? What steps can we take? Well, the first thing you want to do is you want to take a sample. So you're going to get out your cup cutter or your plugger. When you pull out a plug, you want to take it from what we call the margin of disease. So that simply just means that we're pulling a plug from that ring that captures some of the disease as well as the turf surrounding it. So you can see where I pulled this plug from here. Next, we're going to take that plug back to our office. We'll get a wet paper towel and we're going to put all that in a Ziploc bag or a Tupperware container. Make sure it's something that we can seal. Take that incubating bag, we've got to put it in our desk drawer, filing cabinet, wherever it is, as long as you don't forget about it. I'm going to close it up. We're going to leave that plug overnight and wait until the next day to look at it. Finally, when we take our plug out and inspect it, we're going to pull it out of the bag, and what we're looking for is this fluffy white mycelium. If that ring is Waitea patch, it's going to bloom overnight. And so that's that fluffy white stuff you can see on the soil around here. So that's a pretty quick and dirty way we can assess what we're looking at just from the comfort of the golf course without necessarily having to send it into a lab. But you might be asking yourself, well, does it really matter which patch disease I have? Because the fungicides I spray for one will most likely target the other. And I say to that, yes, it does matter, but particularly when we consider how we're going to look at our cultural management approaches. So let's just get back into yellow patch here and look at what cultural management options we have to reduce disease. First off, let's talk fertilization. Now for yellow patch, we want to avoid applying high rates of soluble N sources in the spring and fall. And this is great because this goes hand in hand with our microdocium patch recommendations. So that's pretty helpful. We're trying to avoid those flushes of growth and that lush succulent tissue, particularly going into those winter months. So be sure to rely on some slow release end sources, and most importantly, maintain that balanced fertility, that balanced NPK. And these are pretty much our general recommendations for both microdochium patch and yellow patch. When it comes to irrigation, we're really just recommending avoiding over irrigation in those spring and fall months because yellow patch thrives in those damp conditions. So just being aware of the weather patterns and irrigation requirements of the turf in that shoulder season is going to be pretty important. And going along that, we want to improve drainage where it's possible so that we can allow the turf to not be oversaturated. And again, this applies to microdochium patch as well. So these are cultural management approaches which are targeting both of these. For cultivation, so both our rhizoctonias we brought up today are found in areas of high thatch and heavy compaction. So we really recommend aerifying and top dressing regularly so that you're managing those thatch levels and the compaction of turf areas. And then just a final cultural practice, which kind of ties into improving the drainage a little bit too and airflow, is to prune or remove the trees. So fungi are found in damp, stagnant areas in golf courses. So whatever steps we can take to limb up those areas, improve that drainage, improve that airflow is going to be very beneficial. Now, what about chemical control? So I mentioned before that yellow patch is more of an aesthetic disease on the course, and typically we don't recommend making fungicide applications to just control yellow patch. But that's not to say there aren't effective fungicides for yellow patch control that we can build into an overall fungicide program. I'm going to highlight a curative yellow patch trial I conducted last fall at our research facility. I also did a preventative trial, but I'm just covering the curative approach for this video. So what I did is I made one application of these products on the 8th of October, and then I rated these plots 6 weeks later. So to assess disease, what I did initially before I sprayed is I did a grid count of the plots by counting the number of intersects where yellow patch was observed, and then I converted that to a percentage. Then 6 weeks later, when I came back after they'd been sprayed, I overlaid the same grid, so it was over the same locations, and I was able to count the yellow patch again. So the information and the data I'm presenting is a reduction in yellow patch expressed as a percentage of the intersects. And you can just see some of the treatments and rates listed here. I'm going to just highlight a few plots. Let's start with the non-treated control. So you can see that there was almost a 40% reduction in yellow patch in a non-treated plot 6 weeks after the trial started. And that really highlights what I was saying about yellow patch being more of an aesthetic disease that can recover without chemical control. We had some warmer temperatures and the grass was able to recover slightly from the disease. But that reduction is still not considered acceptable. So let's look at our next product, ProStar. Now, ProStar is considered to be quite a good product for rhizoctonia diseases, and we can see that one application at that 1.5 ounce rate did quite well compared to some of the other treatments. We got a 74% reduction in disease. So it's not perfect control curatively, but again, this was just one application at that lower label rate. And finally, let's look at this, Headway. So this was the only product when applied curatively in this scenario that had almost 99% reduction in yellow patch. So just bear in mind, this is 1 year of data. I am planning on repeating this both preventatively and curatively again this spring and fall, but it brings up an important point about fungicide programs and selecting the right fungicide. I'm going to spend my last few minutes just showing you a really good resource for selecting fungicides for your program. So first, you want to start out by Googling Chemical Control of Turfgrass Diseases 2020. So this document is updated annually, so continue to look for the most current information through the years. When you click on that link, you get this really big PDF file, and this is the work of 3 universities that are compiling information from fungicide trials throughout the US. It's got tons of information on diseases and fungicides, understanding contacts versus systemics, etc. But we're really just going to scroll down to look for specific diseases. Everything's alphabetical, so you see that we have anthracnose here, that's one of our first ones, and you can see there's information about the pathogen, some cultural control, and then this table on the right of fungicides. So let's dig a little deeper. When we look at our list of fungicides, we're interested in this column here, it's called efficacy. So everything has a rating on how it performs for that specific disease, and I pulled that out and put that here on the left. So a 4 would be consistently good to excellent control, and a 1 is poor control. So if we looked at a product like Maxtima is a common DMI for anthracnose, we can see that it's rated as 4, and it would be a good choice to include in a spray program for anthracnose. How does that relate to yellow patch, you might ask? Well, remember, we're dealing with shoulder seasons. We're looking at an overlap of multiple different diseases that can occur on the golf course. So let's think back to that curative trial. Imagine it's October and we need to make a fungicide application. We might be dealing with latent anthracnose on the greens. So let's look at our fungicide list. Here we have azoxystrobin and propiconazole, and you can see it's rated well for anthracnose control. But wait a minute, it's October, it's also yellow patch season. Well, we take a look here, we also have azoxystrobin and propiconazole, and they're also rated high for control. But Emily, October, it's microdochium season too, duh. Well, would you look at that? Azoxystrobin and propiconazole, again rated high for control. One product with activity on 3 different diseases. It represents a good shoulder season option for a turfgrass manager. Essentially, I'm just trying to get you thinking about a fungicide program in more of a holistic manner, because we're dealing with more than one problem at a time. So why are we not attempting a solution that deals with more than one of those problems at a time? And with that, thanks for listening. If you have any questions, be sure to reach out. Make sure you follow us on Twitter for any research updates. And finally, check out beaverturf.com for all the information on our new education certificate program.